Good morning, it's Friday the 25th of August in London. This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, one of the ECB's most influential policymakers says it's much too early to consider pausing interest rate hikes. British and American intelligence officials say Putin is likely to have approved Yevgeny Prigozhin's assassination. Plus, a mugshot moment. Donald Trump becomes the first former US president in history to have a police photo taken. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. And starting with central bankers gathering in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, to discuss global monetary policy. The ECB's Governing Council member Joachim Nagel says he isn't convinced inflation is cool enough for the bloc to halt rate hikes. Speaking to Bloomberg, the Bundesbank president said any decision will hinge on additional data in the coming weeks.
Inflation is coming down, core is still sticky, and so the next months we will get more information about this. It's, for me, much too early to think about a pause. I think we have to wait for the next numbers.
Joachim Nagel says he doesn't expect Germany to fall into recession, citing a better outlook for next year, despite a weak third quarter. And just after 9 p.m. London time, we'll bring you an exclusive Bloomberg interview with European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde. Well, staying with the central bankers gathering in Wyoming, two Federal Reserve officials say the US is near the end of its hiking cycle. Boston Fed President Susan Collins says we might even be there already.
I have said that we may be near, we could even be at a place where we would hold, but certainly additional increments are possible, and we need to look holistically and be really patient right now and not try to get ahead of what the data will tell us as it unfolds.
However, Collins and Philadelphia Fed President Patrick Harker disagree on the potential need for more rate hikes. Join us to hear Chair Jerome Powell's Jackson Hole speaks live on Bloomberg Radio and television at 3 p.m. London time. Toronto Dominion Bank says it's cooperating with an investigation by US authorities. More from Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
The inquiries are related to TD's compliance with rules aimed at fighting money laundering, and the U.S. Department of Justice is among those making requests. TD said it's cooperating with authorities and is pursuing efforts to enhance its Bank Secrecy Act anti-money laundering compliance program. TD is Canada's second largest bank. It made the disclosure in its third quarter financial results on Thursday. TD also said it may face penalties as a result of the probe. In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
UK consumer confidence bounced back this month as strong wage growth boosts household finances. GfK's measure of sentiment rose to minus 25 in August. That's the second highest reading of the last 12 months. While still remaining overall negative, consumer confidence has improved this year as UK economic growth continues to outperform forecasts. Well, despite that, UK homeowners are taking tough steps to shore up their finances. Bloomberg's James Woolcock has more.
Monetary policy works, but not always in the way you might predict. With the average person facing a £220 boost to their monthly bills if they remortgage, a third of those looking to refinance in the next year are taking on extra shifts or side jobs. Online freelance platform Indeed Flex also found more than a half are cutting back on spending on takeaways and holidays. It's a burden falling largely on younger homeowners, with 30% of those affected being under 35. In London, James Woolcock, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
British and American intelligence officials say that Yevgeny Prigozhin's death in a plane crash was probably an assassination approved by Vladimir Putin. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter reports.
The Pentagon says that assessment has Prigozhin on board and killed. Brigadier General Pat Ryder says it does not appear to be a surface-to-air missile that took it down. He says it definitely will change Wagner moving forward.
For all intents and purposes, their combat effectiveness has been diminished, and they are no longer a significant factor when it comes to the conflict inside Ukraine.
Now, UK is also working on the assumption that it was brought down deliberately. Russian President Vladimir Putin has expressed his condolences. I'm Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Donald Trump's handed himself in at an Atlanta jail to be booked on state charges that he conspired to overturn the result of the 2020 presidential election in Georgia. Speaking to reporters at Atlanta Airport after his release, the former president says it was a sad day for America.
What has taken place here is a travesty of justice. We did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. And everybody knows it. I've never had such support. And that goes with the other ones, too. What they're doing is election interference. They're trying to interfere with an election.
Trump maintains his innocence but has become the first former president to have his mugshot taken. He was in the jail for about 20 minutes and his arraignment is expected early next month. So those are our top stories this morning. On the markets, the MSCI Irish Pacific Index 1.2% lower. Eurostoxx 50 futures are 0.2 lower, as well as the 10-year Treasury yield is a basis point higher at 4.25%. Well, if you want an interesting read this morning, I highly recommend a gripping tale from our legal reporter Catherine Gemmell about how two teenage hackers in the UK cracked Nvidia, Grand Theft Auto and Uber as well. It's a deep dive into the legal documents around these two young people who somehow got the better of the biggest US technology companies, compiled from London court proceeding documents, witness testimonies, police investigation, and also sources in the cybersecurity industry. The detail of how they got access to some of these companies' private information, particularly leaking details of the new Grand Theft Auto game. It's absolutely fascinating. Highly recommend that read from Catherine Gemmell this morning, how two UK teen hackers cracked Nvidia, Rockstar's GTA and Uber. Well, let's turn now to get more details on the annual gathering of central bankers in Jackson Hole, already giving us diverging opinions from central bankers on where rates will go next. The ECB's Governing Council member Joachim Nagel says it's much too early to consider pausing rate hikes, while two Fed officials have signalled that policymakers may be close to being done with interest rate increases. Our executive editor for Asia Markets, Paul Dobson, joins us now for more. Paul, let's start with Joachim Nagel's comments then. We had PMI data for the Eurozone this week showing softness in many of the major economies. He's not ready, though, for a pause at the ECB.
No, spoken like a true Bundesbanker. Good morning, Stephen. Good to be with you. So I think Nagel's view is, to the far hawkish side of where the ECB is right now. Still worried about inflation. Still above 5%, he says. That's not our mission complete. We've got to get it all the way down to 2% and be confident that it's going to stay there. And I'm not confident that we've done enough to get it there yet, which is why he's looking for more hikes, which I think, isn't the view of the entire Governing Council of the ECB. I think there's quite a broad spread there. Others would like to wait and see, having done all these hikes, whether that starts to feed through and whether the trend can continue even with interest rates at these levels. I think market pricing wise, there's also a lack of conviction, or we're not convinced that there's going to be more hikes coming through from the ECB, sort of half a hike priced in more or less, I think, for the rest of the year. So it's 50-50 whether they go again or not, but not too much more left to reload, which would be interesting. Like you said, the PMI data that we had this week was absolutely diabolical. The services disappointing, as well as the manufacturing still looking weak. So, it depends on your view. If you think ECB has to defeat inflation at all costs, regardless of whether it causes a recession, then of course keep on going. But if you think they're going to be worried about the broader economy, then, maybe they'll be sitting on their hands and waiting.
No, Jackson Hole is quite the jamboree for central bankers. We heard also from the Federal Reserve, Susan Collins and Patrick Harker too. A bit of a different message coming from them, though, on rates.
Different message, but same debate, right? They're more, I think Harker is saying, let's sit on our hands and wait from here. Collins saying we might have to hike some more. And I think, it's the same sort of dilemma. Has the Fed already done enough to let things run for a little bit from here? Or is there scope to be more aggressive, given that we're still seeing those very strong employment numbers and inflation is still way above target? The same as Nagel was saying. I think from the US side, what the markets are looking for is perhaps one more hike before the end of the year, but if it's going to come, it's more likely not at the next meeting, but subsequent ones a little bit later in the year. So that sort of hike pause pattern may continue for a little bit if we continue to see very strong numbers in the inflation.
Yeah, I mean, we're still several weeks away from a decision from either the Fed or the ECB on what they're going to do next. How much weight do markets attach to the commentary that we get out of policymakers at Jackson Hole?
Oh no, it's huge, because it's that opportunity to take that stage and send not only a short-term but also a longer-term message. And I think, especially for Chair Powell, that's partly what the market will be looking for today, not just what's his view of whether we do one more hike or not. We kind of know the Fed's towards the end of the hiking cycle. It's more about how long is it going to keep interest rates at these higher levels. What does it mean when it says data dependent? Does every data point matter, or is it a trend? And what does the long-term neutral rate look like these days? You know, kind of, does the Fed need to, in principle, have interest rates at a higher level than we've seen over the past 5 or 10 years just to keep inflation kind of at an even keel from here? Those are the things that I think fixed income investors are going to be paying particular attention to.
OK, Paul Dobson, thank you very much. We are data dependent to central banks. We depend on you to put the context around the commentary from them as well. That's our executive editor for Asia Markets, Paul Dobson there. Up next, more bricks in the wall, and Oxford Street scrambles to retain its iconic status.
Now, the paper review on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. The news you need to know from today's papers.
Leanne Gerrans has the details of those stories in the papers for us this morning. Good morning to you, Leanne. Let's start in the Financial Times. The headline, BRICS leaders invite 6 nations, including Saudis and Iran, to join bloc.
So, Stephen, yesterday we did speak about this briefly when we got the news, but really the conversation has moved on to what it means adding these countries to the BRICS emerging market bloc. That is where things are moving to. And as we know, the bloc has launched its biggest expansion in history as Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia and the UAE were all invited to join. But what the Financial Times is really going into here is the expansion represents a huge victory for China. China has been pushing for rapid expansion of the group before the summit as part of its ambitions to really lead the developing world. We do know that China has a big influence in many countries, even in Africa. Iran and Saudi Arabia, which is the world's biggest oil producer outside the US, that's Saudi Arabia. And we just have to remember these are some of the first Middle Eastern countries to join BRICS. So China is looking to also build relations between Riyadh and Tehran this year. So it looks like there's going to be a shift in thinking when it comes to these countries joining the bloc. Brazil's President Lula da Silva's been speaking. He says the new members will increase the BRICS share of global GDP from 32% to 37% on a purchasing power parity basis. And I think this is such an interesting conversation. Also, Bloomberg opinion columnist Pantrak Mishra has been speaking, and his column is absolutely great. He says BRICS is a little more than a meaningless acronym. The group is seeking to counter US influence, and how the group is moving really with this new announcement.
Yeah, really, really great piece from Pantrak Mishra. Definitely worth a read there as well. I also note with interest they're keeping the acronym BRICS.
Yes,
Silva was asked that yesterday.
I don't know if you saw any memes around yesterday on the internet, but they added the other countries' initials, and I can only imagine. Yes, you can only
Letter
imagine.
Soup.
Yeah.
Let's go to the Telegraph next, Leanne. The headline there: Oxford Street needs support to retain iconic status.
So IKEA is delaying its new store opening on Oxford Street, Stephen. Do you remember that's where the old Topshop used to be? I feel like I frequented that very often. My footsteps are well entrenched into that place. But that was meant to be replaced by IKEA. We know that, but actually it's not going ahead and for another year or so. And IKEA's UK chief, that's Peter Jelkaby, I hope I've said that right, Peter, if you're listening, and has said the iconic status is at risk unless businesses are allowed to invest. So the Swedish furniture giant said it was delaying the opening of its new flagship shop by a year after finding that they needed to refurbish and invest more than they anticipated into the building. Remember, it's a really iconic building right at,
Oxford Circus, yeah.
And, we know what it looks like. And it really comes after there's a growing row with Michael Gove. He's the housing secretary, and that's because he blocked the development of an M&S flagship store, which is in Marble Arch. They wanted to knock it down and rebuild it, and he overruled Westminster Council on this. And now, basically, businesses are hitting out saying we need to invest in order to get Oxford Street back up to that iconic place that it used to be.
Yeah, it does feel like there's quite a long road there in front of it. Let's go to the Wall Street Journal next, Leanne. Wealthy people are getting full body scans.
So This story is absolutely fascinating and it's right down my street. Kim Kardashian recently shared an Instagram post touting her own scan, and that was really an MRI company, Prenova. So they do these early scans, and the basis of them is that you can find out what's wrong with you. So even if you're healthy, even if you're well, even if you're young, companies are selling body scans to healthy patients, promising for what's peace of mind, really, Stephen. So that's really something I find quite fascinating, because I'm in the debate here. Would I pay between $650 to several $1,000s to make sure that I was okay? Or would I listen to medical professionals who are concerned about the cost and say people are going to go and
doing
have
it
these,
unnecessarily, essentially.
and they're going to go and have these scans. They're going to find out they could have a benign tumour and go through months of stress.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond. Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com. Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa device. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.